Welcome once again. Hey, I wanted to do a quick little impromptu live stream to really address something that has been um, said in one of the comments. Okay, somebody said in one of the comments, well, it seems like you're attacking Paul a lot. You might as well be consistent and attack all the apostles. Well, first of all, I want to make it clear, okay? I am not attacking Paul. I am attacking theology, bad theology, okay? People who, overdo Paul's letters. That's what I should say. Now, this is my point of view. Okay, you need to understand the point of view. I believe in being like the men of Berea. Okay, Acts chapter 17. When Paul went to Berea, the men of Berea, they listened to Paul. They were willing to hear him out, but they said, "Listen, Paul, we're gonna test everything you say with the scriptures. Everything you say with the scriptures." That means that they were going to run everything past what we would call the Old Testament. Okay, you need to realize back then there was no such thing as New Testament scripture. There was no such thing as the New Testament. When it says that they tested everything that Paul said, all of Paul's message, every point that Paul makes with scripture, it was talking about the scripture that was already considered to be authentic scripture back in those days. Scripture that was written before Jesus was even born. Okay. So you know what? I am sure, one of these days, Lord willing, if I, see Paul in heaven or something like that, I'm pretty sure Paul would have absolutely no problem with being like the men of Berea. No problem with what I am saying. I really don't think he will. I think he would probably say, "Hey, it shocks me that I just sat down with with almost like a pen and a paper, and I wrote a personal letter to Timothy and to Philemon and all these other guys, and then it ended up in the same book as the Torah." Like, he would probably be probably shaking in his boots, to be honest with you. But anyway, no, I'm not attacking Paul. I am just speaking the facts. I am just saying what Paul actually said about his own letters. Okay. Now, I think it's a really good point that we should be consistent, and also, the way I look at Paul, the way we, run Paul's letters past, the scripture and be like a Berean, we should be like that with Peter, James, and John as well. However, Peter, James, and John was part of the 12. Again, you got to realize this. There's Jesus that was in the center, so to speak. Then there was his inner circle. Okay, there was Peter, James, and John. Peter, James, and John went places and heard things and saw things that the other 9 did not see. They were part of the, like the premium club, so to speak. Okay, so Jesus did not bring his 12 everywhere with him. Time and time again, he left the other 9 behind. He said, "Wait, you guys stay here. I am taking Peter, James, and John, and we are going, and we're going to be doing some really serious business here." Okay, so if there's anybody that would know the Lord, it would be Peter, James, and John. Okay, the other 9 would know the Lord as well, a lot more than Paul would. I mean, let's be honest, because they lived with Jesus. They breathed the same air that he breathed. They heard him, in the flesh. We don't even know that Paul did. We don't even know that Paul actually even seen him, physically in the flesh. Okay. All we know is that Peter, James, and John were the closest to Jesus. And John, out of those 3, was the closest to Jesus. Okay. The other 9 was kind of like on the outer circle. Okay. Paul was outside of that. Okay. So Peter, James, and John deserve our utmost honor and respect. Okay. And so I don't put them on the same level as Paul. However, if you were to look at the writings of Peter, James, and John, if you were to look at their writings, and let me put it this way. Take the writings of Peter, take the writings of James, take the writings of John, take the writings of Paul, okay? And if you were to analyze them, you would see that Peter, James, and John are very much in tune. The letters of Peter, the letters of John, the letter of James, very much in tune. They all spoke very, very clearly of personal holiness, walking in holiness, speaking against sin, promoting, obeying God. I mean, James is the one that said, hey, you know what? If your faith is without works, it's dead. Dead, okay? I'm telling you, you can't expect dead faith to take you an inch toward heaven, okay? James really, really nailed that to the floor, okay? Not like Paul at all, because Paul made it sound like, well, Abraham was justified without works. That's the way Paul wrote. But James said very, very clearly, it wasn't just faith that justified Abraham. It was his works also. He said that explicitly. John, okay, look at the letters of John. He's the one that came out and said, hey, anybody who sins is of the devil. I mean, wow, that is quite a statement, okay? He's the one that said sin is the transgression of the law. Sin is transgression of the law. Whereas some Christians today say that, well, just not believing that is the only sin, and they quote Paul's letters on it, okay? Peter, he's the one that in 2 Peter chapter 3, his last words, so to speak, okay, his last words was basically, hey, listen, we got to walk spotless. We got to be like spotless and blameless. We got to walk in holiness. But I'm warning you guys, like Peter was basically saying, I'm warning you guys that Paul, the letters of Paul are twisted and misinterpreted by people to their own destruction. Okay, so in the context of walking in obedience, walking in being sinless, more or less, it's spotless. In that context, Peter says, wait a second, just my last words, okay? My last words for you guys. Okay, Paul, our beloved brother Paul, okay? He's not a false apostle by any means. He's our beloved brother. However, warning, he is hard to understand. He's hard to understand. So we got to be very, very careful. You know what? I've said this to people, like, personally, face to face. I've said this to people, and I'll say it to you, okay? Really, what I would advise anybody to do is read the so-called Old Testament first and get that down. I mean, get it down, know it, memorize it, get it. I mean, really into that. And, read the New Testament, because, the New Testament is built upon the Old Testament. If you don't understand the Old Testament, there's no way you're going to really, really get the New Testament. And I would strongly recommend that in anybody's Bible studies and understanding of the Bible, leave Paul's letters for last, okay? Because of the fact, Peter himself, I mean, one of the closest ones to the Lord, he said himself, Paul is hard to understand. I mean, if there's anybody who knows the Lord, if there's anybody that you would call a genius an expert in Christianity, hey, it would be Peter. It would be Peter. And Peter said, Paul is hard to understand, and it's very easy to misinterpret him to your own destruction. Hey, I mean, if Peter said that, you better believe Paul is misinterpreted and hard to understand. It's almost like Einstein saying, this particular author in physics is hard to understand, and people misinterpret him and misunderstand him. Hey, if Einstein says that, you better believe it's hard to understand. If Peter says that in the realm of spiritual, Christianity, in the realm of the Lord, if Peter says that, you better believe that Paul is hard to understand. So I said all that to say this. yes, I believe in being consistent, okay? The way we look at the letters of Paul, we should also look at the letters of Peter, James, and John. However, look at it in context because they are definitely due of greater honor because of the fact that they walked and talked with Jesus and they were the closest ones to Jesus. I mean, probably that ever lived in the flesh. So my point is this. The letters of Peter, James, and John are very much harmonized in their content, in their put it this way, the song that they sing is the same song. They march to the same beat, okay? But Paul, uh, not knocking Paul, not attacking Paul, but let's just be honest. Paul's letters really has a different tone to them. Okay, to say the least, Paul's letters has a different tone to them. Does that mean that we should not read Paul's letters? And no, of course not. Okay, y'all know that we're going through the letters of Paul right now in our daily readings, and I mean, a lot of stuff he says is absolutely awesome, and we can take it and we can claim it, and I mean, great revelation that we can get from Paul. Absolutely. However, we need to look at this for what it really is. Peter, James, and John, you can tell that they were the team. They were the inner circle. Just by reading, try it sometime, okay? Read the letters of Peter, James, and John and ask yourself, and first of all, is this different? Are these letters different than the letters of Paul? Do they have a certain common thread through them that Paul doesn't necessarily, it's not so easily picked out in the letters of Paul. It's not so easily discernible in the letters of Paul. I would say absolutely yes. Like I said before, Peter, James, and John, they are very much consistent, very much common. There's a common thread of holiness, against sin, living for God, obedience, doing what God says to do, all that kind of stuff. It's just very, very clear in the letters of Peter, James, and John. So I just wanted to very quickly bring a live stream here. Just before I go, I'm going to check out some of these comments. Also, I am also going to post a video. We're going to start the book of Galatians. And so I'm going to post in Galatians, introduction to Galatians. And this is going to be really awesome as well. I say similar things to what I just said in this video. However, I go into a lot more detail. That's going to be posted, Lord willing, within hours. Okay. So let me see here. Yes, the Gospel of John. I'm telling you, just a comment on that. The Gospel of John. This is another thing. I mean, there's the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you can tell John was a very special person. John wrote in a very different way than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So it's awesome, absolutely awesome. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with you, Dean. Yes, we are supposed to be imitators of Christ. I think that, in one of Paul's letters, he said that one person said, I follow Apollos. Another one says, I follow Peter. Another one says, I follow Paul. And Paul said, hey, wait a second. You shouldn't be saying all that, right? We're all followers of Jesus, okay? So, and that's another thing, too. We got to realize when we're reading these letters, hey, the words in red, they're the words. They are the words in red. And so we're followers of Jesus and not followers of Paul or anybody else. That reminds me of one thing, and I'm sure that for those of you who have listened to a lot of my videos, you've heard me say this before, and I'll say it just again, just in closing here, and that is, a lot of Christians, I believe, should rename themselves as Paulians, because they don't really go by what Jesus says, especially in regards to salvation, in regards to what's going to happen on Judgment Day, in regards to obedience to the Lord, obedience to God. They don't go by what Jesus actually said, the words in red. They go by what Paul said, or let me put it this way. They go by what they understand of what Paul said, their interpretation of Paul. Yes, thank you very much, Dean. Yep, absolutely. I appreciate it. Thank you for your comments. And like I said, within hours, I will post another video. Let me just see here. Yep, very good. Yeah, very good thing. I am the bread of life. That is such an awesome thing. Touched a little bit on that during the videos going through John, and I will definitely touch on that again. We're going to get to that, especially when we get into, like I said, Lord willing, I want to go through the whole, every single word of the scriptures from Genesis to Revelation and then some. So, you know, especially when we get to the part of the manna, it's going to be very awesome. Yeah. The church is not in a very good shape at all. Not very good at all. Generally speaking, in the world, there is a remnant left of people who really, you know, seek the truth and know the truth, and they don't want, you know, programs and a social club. They want the real deal. You know, that's what we want, right? We want the real deal. We want Book of Acts type Christianity. So thanks again, and I will be back very shortly. And until then, you know, like I always say, seek God with all your heart, and you will find Him. And that includes in every area, for everything you need, all of your prayer needs and everything. Seek God and you'll find Him. Call upon Him, and I tell you, He will show you great and mighty things. He will blow you away. You know what? He can show you things that is so awesome you can't even articulate it. Okay. Until next time, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you later. Love you guys.